This is going to sound a bit strange, but looking back on Bart vs the Space Mutants, I've started seeing it a bit more fondly. When I ranked it, I spent so much time talking about its many flaws, which I still stand by, but having to play that game for as long as I did, I can't say I completely hated it. It certainly helped that the Game Boy follow-up, Bart Simpson's Escape from Camp Deadly, turned out to actually be a decent little game. Still nothing to write home about, but I'm in an oddly positive place when it comes to the Simpsons games and Imagineering. Call it Stockholm Syndrome, but I'm a bit excited to be checking out the next game, Bart vs the World. It's another game from Imagineering, and believe it or not, we're still not out of 1991 yet. The first 4 Simpsons games all came out in 1991, and 3 of those were made by the same company. That fact alone means it's no shock that the quality is low, but it's crazy to think about being able to play 4 brand new Simpsons games, all in the same year, while The Simpsons was at its height of popularity. Normally I would give more background on the game we're ranking, but I couldn't find out much about Bart vs the World. Acclaim and Imagineering were churning out Simpsons games as quick as they could to cash in on the popularity of the show at the time, and this is just the next NES game serving as the sequel to Bart vs the Space Mutants. I do have a vague memory of this game as I actually did own it as a kid on the NES. I remember something like Bart riding on his skateboard along the top of a castle wall, I want to say, and I'm pretty sure I also didn't like the game. Before doing this series, I had no idea I played this game before, and this memory only unlocked thanks to doing these videos. Now my childhood memories of the NES comprise of playing through Super Mario Bros. 3 and leaving it on overnight just so I could beat it the next day, playing Tetris multiplayer late at night when I was supposed to be in bed, and some rushed out Simpsons game. Bart vs the World may have even been the first time I ever interacted with anything Simpsons related, which is a weird thing to think about. I've made myself a bit sad with that thought, so how about I move on before I discover some deep dark secrets about myself and get into the game. Okay, so like Bart vs the Space Mutants, the original version of Bart vs the World was released on the NES, so I'll be starting there. It's a good first impression. We have a title screen showing Bart on his skateboard spinning around the Earth in space. It's pretty silly, but quite impressive. It's more epic than it has any right to be, honestly. The opening cutscene takes us to an episode of the Krusty the Clown Show, where Krusty is about to announce the winner of an art contest that was sponsored by the nuclear power plant. The winner will get to take part in a scavenger hunt to find Krusty-related items all over the world. Todd, Martin and Bart have entered the competition, and despite Bart's clearly being the worst, he still somehow wins. We then cut to Mr. Burns and Smithers talking about how they rigged this competition for Bart to win so they can send the Simpsons all over the world and attempt to, I think, just murder them. Or if you want the family-friendly version in the game, wipe them off the face of the earth. The title screen was a good first impression, and having the Krusty the Clown Show as the opening cutscene is a good idea. Combine that with Mr. Burns being the villain, and this feels much closer to the show than Space Mutants did. This is more what I would expect out of a Simpsons game. From a presentation point of view, it's good enough, but some of the characters look off. Sideshow Mel looks traumatized and Bart simply looks awful. It's got more of that Imagineering bootleg vibes here. The main problem though is that it's too long. It takes nearly 3 minutes to watch all of this, and it's mostly static images with text at the bottom. Maybe they had to make it this long to get all the plot across. It is a bit overly complicated what's going on here, but 3 minutes is far too long for this type of cutscene. Luckily you can skip it, and that takes you into the level select screen. This is already a big change. You can now select between different levels rather than having to go through them one by one. The first set of levels are all set in China, so how about we select this big ship which is labelled Junk, which is the name used for old Chinese sailing ships. Straight away you can feel the changes in the level design. If you attempt to go to the right, you will fall off the ship and drown. The game instead wants you to go left, and the objective here, which it doesn't tell you by the way, is to find the map sign to complete the level. In terms of movement, there's been a few changes. Climbing is much more of a core mechanic in the level design, like in Escape from Camp Deadly. You can climb up the mast of the ship to go up higher. You can also crouch for whatever reason. It can come in useful for enemies that fly and swoop down at you, although it's used so sparingly it's unlikely you'll ever need to crouch. As you're exploring the ship, there are some enemies to avoid, but this time you can find pickups that give you throwable firecracker balls, and you can use these to take out the enemies. In most games, this wouldn't be a big deal. Yeah, of course you can kill the enemies, but this represents a huge shift from Space Mutants. Enemies function as normal enemies now. They aren't invincible obstacles who are only there to be avoided. You can also take 5 hits rather than 2 before you die, so the health system is much more forgiving. It's certainly nice not having to be afraid of everything, and not having every hit be a big deal. Helps the game feel a bit looser. Unfortunately, the jumping and movement mechanics are still very much based on Space Mutants. That means the super high jump is back, where you have to press B and A at the same time to do a bigger jump, and the running is still done by holding A. It really doesn't feel great to control. I would have liked the improvements to movement from Escape from Camp Deadly to be brought across into this game to stop it feeling so heavy. You'll also notice there's no items or X-ray glasses. All of that has been stripped out in favour of focusing on platforming and dealing with enemies. Initially, it definitely feels like an improvement. The controls and how Bart feels is still pretty bad, but everything has been simplified, and the enemies and health systems are much more forgiving. This level has an odd feeling to it though. You start on the right of the ship, and there's 2 sails to climb that you can run along the horizontal poles, where you can find different pickups. It's confusing because there's nothing that guides you in any way. You're supposed to go to the top left corner of the ship, the opposite corner where you start, and if you want, you can just walk to the left, climb up the left sail, and leave it in no time at all, because that's all you need to do. Doing that leaves so much of the level unexplored, but most of the level is just copy and paste of the same pole along the sail anyway. I guess they're teaching the player to explore more, and that the level design will be a bit more unconventional, but for the very first level of the game, it's extremely basic and almost feels pointless playing it. It's a hard feeling to describe when you're dumped into the first level of the game, walk around for a bit, just to stumble upon a map sign that ends the level, and that's that. Not necessarily bad, just hollow. When the first stage of Space Mutants was so long, having this level be only a couple of minutes without much going on is a big change in terms of the pacing. Anyway, there's a few other levels that we have available, and beating Junk unlocks the Great Wall level. Before playing that, how about we try out some of the other levels we have here? Okay, this is sliding puzzle, and yeah, it's exactly as described. It's a jumbled up picture of Marge, and sliding the pieces to complete the puzzle gives us some Krusty tokens. There's also card match. You have to pick cards, try and remember which ones you saw, and match up all the pairs. Lastly, there's Simpsons trivia, where you get 3 questions about the show, and you have to try and get them all right to earn Krusty tokens. After that first level was so short, and now having 3 really basic, I guess you would call them activities, this doesn't really feel like a real video game. Trivia, card matching, and sliding puzzles, these barely fulfill the requirements to be called games. They're so uninspired and again, basic. To give Bart vs. the World some credit, these are optional and are just a chance to earn Krusty tokens, which improves your score and gives you extra lives, but they're not really presented that way. When you look at this map screen, there's nothing that separates the bonus levels from the real ones. It feels like pure padding. They needed more content, so they made the most uninspired minigames you can make. As blatant as this padding is, doing the Simpsons trivia was actually kind of cool. The questions are all about Season 1 and Season 2, and it really tests your knowledge of early Simpsons, and that was fun. It still barely counts as content, but it was nice to be tested. I did pretty well, only getting a few questions wrong in my playthroughs. For the second real level of the game, we have the Great Wall, where Bart is skateboarding along the top of the Great Wall of China. Oh, it wasn't a castle I was remembering, it was the Great Wall of China. Silly me. You're skateboarding to the right, avoiding dragons and jumping off ramps over pits. The level has a semi-isometric viewpoint, and you have to go up and down to avoid the pits and collect items. For some reason though, you can't go up and down without first moving left to right. It takes time to even pick up speed when pressing left to right, and it makes it feel so heavy. You have times where you have to go through a doorway, but missing the doorway bumps you into a wall and you completely stop. You can't move up and down to line yourself up with the doorway unless you're moving left or right, and the camera moves all the way to the side to give you no space to do that. All this while there's a dragon above you that can do damage. This level isn't that long, but there are several pits that will kill you outright, and there's no checkpoint, so dying sends you back to the start. There's even times where you'll trip up on the floor, and Bart does this long animation of him tripping, and that does damage, but it can also send you over the top of a bottomless pit and kill you. I've played this game enough times that I can beat this no problem, but first time picking up the game, you'll likely get your first game over here. You have to get used to the bad movement, to how the ramps work, to the isometric viewpoint that makes it hard to know where Bart is, and the awkward momentum. It's so easy to die, so sluggish moving Bart, and for what was a cool idea, it's not fun at all. Beating the Great Wall unlocks the exit sign for China, and selecting it takes us to the first boss, Fu Manchu Burns. The concept of the game is that Mr. Burns is sending Bart to different parts of the world and having his relatives, who are all alternative versions of Mr. Burns, try and take him out. This means we have a Chinese version of Mr. Burns here. How about we say that nowadays this is pretty insensitive and this idea hasn't aged too well and just leave it at that. You fight Fu Manchu Burns along the Great Wall, picking up firecracker balls and throwing them at him. He throws balls at you and can deflect your firecrackers back at you as well using his fan. I think there is a trick to this, but I never really figured out what that was. It's an easy boss. If you keep throwing firecracker balls at him, enough of them will do damage, and it only takes a few hits to take him out. Beating Fu Manchu Burns takes us straight to the next set of levels set in the North Pole. Once again, we have bonus levels to play to earn more Krusty tokens. They do mix these up a bit for each world. Instead of trivia and card matching, we have this igloo game where you have to pick the correct igloo after they've been shuffled around, and a slot machine. They're different types of games, but not much better. There are activities that still barely qualify as something to do, stripped down versions of Mario Party minigames. The first actual level is the Ice Cave, where we have some horizontal platforming, avoiding icicles and jumping over pits, and then some vertical platforming going up these vertical shafts, and then ending off with some more horizontal platforming, jumping on these small platforms over an instant kill river and bouncing off some bubbles. The first platforming level, Junk, established that the level design would be very different, and the Ice Cave continues this trend. They were very proud that they now support proper vertical scrolling, and the levels focus much more on going up and down as a result. Unfortunately, they didn't really have any good ideas for how to use vertical spaces to create interesting challenges. The vertical shafts are just two sets of platforms on either side that you jump between. There's so many to jump on, and there's little variation. It's like something from the original Metroid, although without the sense of exploration and atmosphere that game had, it's a really boring platforming challenge. The level also doesn't have any enemies, and with the solid black background and repetitive design, this level feels so empty. It honestly doesn't feel finished. Like, this is an early prototype where they built a rough framework for a level, but didn't have time to add any substance or nuance to it. If you didn't get a game over when skateboarding, you certainly will here on your first playthrough. It starts with icicles which fall at an insane rate, constantly raining down, making them so hard to avoid. I ultimately stopped trying to avoid them, and just sprinted through this bit, allowing myself to take some damage just to get through it. Also, in typical Imagineering fashion, getting hit by an icicle is likely the first thing that will happen to you when you start playing the level. While that is bad, it's the end section of the Ice Cave that killed me so many times. You have to jump on tiny platforms, which are slippery as you're in an ice cave, and falling off is an instant death. Remember how Escape from Camp Deadly had generous platform collision to allow you to make jumps comfortably? Well, that philosophy has been completely ditched, and the platform collision is a mess. The collision doesn't always line up properly with how a platform looks, and it's very easy to fall through a platform rather than landing on it. With the bad collision, slippery physics and heavy controls, I found it was almost better to just go as fast as you could rather than trying to take your time. What does cause you to stop, however, are the bubbles. You have to wait until the bubbles build up on top of the water, and when there's a big bubble, you can use that to bounce to the next platform. You get so little time to jump on the big bubble, and missing it is an instant kill. You can burn through lives on this section as it's completely unforgiving. I mentioned before that the health system was more forgiving with the extra hits you get, but that doesn't matter when platforming in most of the levels take place over instant kill pits. I don't think Bart vs. the World is more forgiving, because the game is littered with level design like this. Parts of the levels that will kill you outright, making the extra health a nice gesture, but the level design team clearly had no interest in making the game easier overall. Getting through the Ice Cave unlocks the second level in the North Pole, the Frozen River. It's much more to the point. No going up and down, it's a long river and you have to ride on ice blocks to get across. Let's get right back to complaining, shall we, because what makes this level terrible is the physics. The ice platforms don't move on their own, you have to jump on them to make them move. The more frequently you jump on them, the faster they go. When you jump though, the platform keeps moving underneath you, so you're not jumping on the spot, you're jumping up and trying to land back on the ice as it continues to move. You can get used to it, but it's so awkward. The river is another instant kill pit, so again not very forgiving either. One missed jump and you're dead. Nice to see a blue version of Blinky in the river though, that's pretty cool. Beating the frozen river unlocks the boss, which is a Yeti version of Mr. Burns. Pretty basic boss. There's 3 holes, wait for him to appear in one of them, jump on his head while avoiding what he throws at you. It's really baffling how easy Imagineering makes their bosses compared to how brutal their level design can be. The inconsistency in design is so strange, and I think it proves how directionless these games can be. Anyway, the next world is Egypt, and this time we have 3 proper levels and only 2 bonus levels. It's nice to see the balance shift towards proper content. I look forward to playing a lot more of these platforming stages. First one is Great Pyramid. That starts with us climbing up the pyramid to get inside. At the beginning is a Bartman item, which picking it up turns us into Bartman, who can fly around levels without any real restriction. Bartman was also in the junk stage, allowing you to fly around the ship, and hidden in the ice cave level. It's a fun idea, and on paper makes sense to have something like this when there is a stronger focus on vertical level design. They don't do much with this idea though. There are items floating in the air to pick up, yes, and it can save you a lot of climbing, but you're mostly flying around empty space with no sense of purpose to what you're doing. It also looks really silly. It's easy to have Bart look the wrong way when flying, so you can be flying to the right but Bart will be facing left. It's not bad really, but it's a wasted idea. There's no interesting challenges presented when using the cave, just fly upwards and that's it. Once inside the pyramid, there's some tight corridors to go through and some more platforming. The bubbles in the ice cave was awful, and we have yet another awful section with these pillars. Some of the pillars will sink when standing on them and then shoot back upwards, and you can use these to jump higher. I could not get these to work consistently at all. It feels so random. You would think that you would just press A just before the pillar shoots you up, but I don't think that's it. This is a game with a super high jump where you have to press B and A to get the biggest jump, so do you have to press 2 buttons at the same time? Do you have to press them at a different time? I don't know. I couldn't figure it out properly, and it feels awful. So there's an area above this that I never saw because I couldn't get the jump to work. To add insult to injury, if you want to just carry on and go to the right and progress, you have to deal with the pillars lowering down as you jump across them. It's so easy for your jump not to work, and that causes you to fall off and you die, because once again, this all takes place over instant kill water. This is the only time in the game this mechanic is used. Why have it so the player is killed if they make one mistake? I got game overs in the ice cave, and I got game overs here too. It's just so unnecessarily cutthroat sometimes. Once you lock your way past the pillars, there's this block that moves, creating a row of floating blocks in the air that you can ride to get across this big open chasm. Not a bad idea, and it helps that if you do fall off, you can save yourself by landing back where you started, so that's something. But the heavy controls make this feel pretty awful. It's a bit tense, but for the wrong reasons, as you're not sure when the game is just going to randomly have you slip off. After jumping on some unnecessarily tiny platforms, we reach the end, and that's one of the 3 levels done in Egypt. Next up is Valley of Kings, which starts with avoiding tornadoes over sinking sands. Not much to this level really, until you reach a pit that you jump into, and you can land on the sides here to find these small rooms. This pit has more strange vibes to it, because it's more copy and paste level design. It's one giant pit downwards, with the same rooms copy and pasted all along the edge. Like the ship level back at the start, you can fall to the bottom and leave straight away, but you can also explore these rooms, but they're all similar and it makes it feel so off. There are slight tweaks to each room, but visually it just repeats itself. It's padding to give it a better sense of verticality, but doing it in the most lazy way possible, which removes the sense of it feeling like a real space, or even just a proper video game level. Reaching the bottom gives us a door where going through it takes us to a massive room where you have to climb to the top of a sphinx. Once again, not a bad idea. Finding a giant sphinx underground is neat, but Imagineering are back to their old tricks again where they don't mark what is a platform and what isn't a platform. It's complete guesswork what you can stand on. Everything looks the same and there are bricks that you can sometimes jump on and sometimes you can't. Luckily, you can skip this climb by going all the way to the left and finding a Bartman token, which lets you fly straight to the top. You're also supposed to figure out that you're meant to climb into the Sphinx right here to exit. There's an item next to it, sure, but nothing visually to make you think that there's an entrance here. Going through the ear takes us to a room with a map sign and we're done. The level isn't too bad ultimately, but it's nothing good either. The best I can say about it is that there is no infuriating platform sections in there, which is how low the bar for this game is. Finally, we have Sphinx, which is one giant open area where you have to reach to the top of a crusty Sphinx. Like with the Sphinx that was underground, you can find a Bartman token and fly to the top, but this time there are flying snakes shooting fireballs, and if you touch them once, you lose the Bartman power up. Items don't respawn in this game even if you die, so you have one shot to do this the easy way, and if you fail, you either have to do it the hard way by climbing up or game over. A lot of NES games suffer from not respawning items even if you die. Never understood that, it just feels unfair and a bit broken to me. Anyway, the hard way is jumping on platforms which aren't over any bottomless pits, which is great, but these snakes can do so much damage to you so quickly. There's usually 2 of them, and even if you kill them, more usually spawn in, although the spawning feels quite random sometimes because they can just disappear. It's quite easy to die to them, but the worst part is the climbing. They don't mark platforms, and they don't mark what you can and can't climb on, so you have to try and climb on different areas and hope it works. If you do go slightly off a climbable area, which is easy to do because they don't mark what is and isn't climbable, Bart will drop off with no way of recovering. You just fall down and have to climb up again. Once you know the route up, it's not too bad, but figuring that out is so painful. Between only having one attempt with Bartman, not knowing what a platform is, not knowing where you can climb, dealing with the flying snakes, and not even knowing where the exit is at first, it's a horrible level. Horrible. Okay, we finally got through Egypt and can take on the boss Ramses Burns. This is another easy boss as long as you can figure out what you need to do. You need to jump into the frayed part as Bart and do it enough times to unravel his carpet. On my first attempt, I accidentally beat this boss when trying to hit him with the firecracker balls, which meant the second times I fought him, I didn't really know what I was doing and he ended up killing me. It is ultimately quite easy, so with Ramses Burns dealt with, it's finally time for the final world, Hollywood. The setting here is whatever they felt like, using themes that you would normally see in films. So the first platforming level is Hollywood Stage 1, which is a giant pirate ship. This game as a whole is all about putting Bart in a variety of themes and locations like in Egypt, so Hollywood is just an excuse to throw a couple of extra ones in there. With the pirate ship, we're straight back to another horrible level. You start at the bottom and you have to work your way up to the top of the ship. Like the junk level, if you fall into the water, you die, which means the beginning of the stage is arguably the hardest part. Lots of small platforms you have to jump on, and they start spamming enemies a lot more here. It's very easy to take damage from the cannonballs, the rats, the pirate captains, and these pirates that shoot out of the ground, with very little space to avoid them. I got a couple of game overs on just this first section. It's so easy to make a mistake and die. Game overs work like they do in Space Mutants and Escape from Camp Deadly. There's no saving or passwords, so losing all your lives means you start the game from the beginning. This is a very short game, so it does feel more reasonable than in Space Mutants, but there's also so many annoying sections in a playthrough, it can feel really defeating getting a game over in Bart vs. the World, because it means you have to do it all again. The terrible skateboarding, the frustrating bubble jumps, the wonky pillars, the unclear climbing, you have to do it all again if you get that game over. Back to the pirate ship, once you do get to the top, you have to keep climbing upwards, and this part is probably worse than the first section. It's similar to the Sphinx where the climbing is so unforgiving. If you come off the netting just a little bit, you fall all the way down, and because there are enemies who respawn very easily, you'll likely land on one of them and take damage. There is a part where you have to climb upwards, and cannonballs are being fired at you, but you can't climb up all the way without taking damage because there is a pirate blocking you, and you have to try and avoid the cannonballs and wait for the pirates to move, while also hoping you don't get disconnected from the net and fall down and have to start again. It doesn't help that the climbing also feels unresponsive. You have to press up to climb, but it doesn't work sometimes. It's way more picky than it should be. Got a few more game overs here as well. I don't know how many more ways I can phrase this platforming section in Bart vs. the World is awful, but this is really dreadful. Getting to the top allows you to carry on further to the right, and the level isn't that different at this point, but it is confusing. The rest of the stage is copying and pasting the top of the ship you've just seen a few more times in a large open area with nothing really in it. All you have to do is keep going right and eventually you'll find the exit, but the sense of space and where everything is completely lost. It's more padding, it's more copy and paste, it's more not trying to create interesting level design with a sense of purpose and point to it, more hacked together awfulness. Alright, that's stage 1 done, and we have 2 new bonus games to try out. The first one is a coffin minigame where you have to guess the correct order of the coffins. It's random, I believe, and if you get it wrong you can just try again until you get it right. The other one is Moe's, where Moe is now a cowboy and running a saloon, and you have to avoid the drinks he slides at you and grab the Krusty tokens. After each round as well, he goes ha ha ha. This is the kind of thing I like! Strange interpretation of classic characters. There's no reason why Moe would be working in Hollywood in a Western themed bar, but it's fun to see. After that, it's off to Hollywood Soundstage 2, which is a horror spooky themed level. I haven't talked about the graphics much as they're largely as bland as Space Mutants, but I think this level looks pretty good. Most of the game is too basic and dated visually, but like Space Mutants, it can have its moments. The actual level itself starts with lots of enemies and projectiles flying off screen, so bad start there, and then you're avoiding gargoyles along a fence, and you're playing another round of guess what's a platform, and guess what does damage and what doesn't do damage. The fence part is easy once you know what is what. Would have been nice if Imagineering put some effort into marking what things are, but at the end we have a graveyard, and you can fall into the grave to go underground. If you jump over the first grave though and stay in the graveyard, these ghosts that look like Smithers start trying to attack you. Yes, more weirdness please, I just want to feel something at this point. The underground section is a bit of a maze where you have to go into graves to get teleported to different parts of the level. These go in a loop, so if you want to progress, you have to land on this part on the right when you're falling down to find a hidden grave to go forward. It's decent, although I could have done without so many enemies that respawn in. It made figuring out where to go a bit more annoying than it needed to be. Escaping the loop takes us to the final part of the level where you're jumping on these blocks with RIP on them and stone platforms along a giant grey stone wall. Now, let's start with the positives. It's not isometric and the platforming collision feels much more consistent here than it does in the rest of the game. I will give them credit for making a functional platforming section. Sadly, this section is way too long. It's more copy and paste level design, taking the same few platforms and making you jump across them over and over and over and over again. All you do is go all the way to the right, climb up a bit, go all the way to the left, climb up a bit again, go all the way to the right, climb up again, just to go all the way to the left to finish the level. Falling off means you die, although if you're up on one of the higher levels you can fall down onto the lower ones, although due to how long it takes to get back up, it's better to just kill yourself anyway and restart from a checkpoint. This section alone took me nearly 10 minutes to complete on my first try. The game itself is not even an hour long, so this makes up a huge chunk of a playthrough. It's not too hard, but it does become frustrating because it's just that long. Finally, after beating Soundstage 2, it's time for the final boss against Mr. Burns' Hollywood relative, Eric Von Burns. It's the hardest boss in the game, but still pretty simple. You have to throw firecracker balls at him while avoiding the megaphones he throws. It takes a lot of hit, but it's fine once you get a sense of his patterns, so he goes down and it's back to the Krusty the Clown show for the final cutscene. Krusty congratulates Bart, but says it's too bad you didn't find all the unique Krusty items, and it means you don't get the special surprise? So this is the bad ending of the game. There's actually two different endings based on whether you found all the unique Krusty items or not. Every core level of the game has a part where you can find a member of the Simpsons family and they will help you get one of these items, which will be a Krusty version of an object matching the theme of the level. So in the pirate level, you can find Maggie and she gives you a Krusty pirate flag. Alright, so it looks like it's time to go back all the way to the beginning and find every single item to see that special surprise. Luckily, the Krusty items aren't that hard to come across. I managed to get most of them naturally when playing the game the first time. I was just missing a couple, like in the skateboarding level. You need to jump into Lisa at the start to make a golden head appear later on, and then there's also the igloo in the frozen river level where you have to throw balls at it to reveal a Krusty head in ice hiding inside. I'm going to hold my hands up here though. When I first beat the game and got the bad ending, I did use a save state to jump straight to the Hollywood levels after getting a lot of game overs. I wanted to beat this game without cheating, but it finally broke me, so I used a save state. When replaying the game again to get the good ending though, I actually didn't use save states at all and ended up beating it legitimately. As I mentioned before, this game is really short, and I skipped most of the bonus games, which means I managed to beat it in 40 minutes with all the unique Krusty items. I'm glad I could beat it without cheating, but it goes to show that even with all the padded level design, this is a tiny game, and nowhere near as long as Space Mutants. Okay, so the good ending has Krusty reveal that they have Mr. Burns and Smithers at the show, and you get a chance to throw pies at them. You get to control Bart and throw pies, and this actually never ends. You can spend as long as you like throwing pies at Burns and Smithers. It's a nice little reward, especially if you were a kid playing this. I'd imagine a kid would find this pretty funny. It's not just a different ending you get for collecting all the unique Krusty items, there's also a new level unlocks called Soundstage 3 in the Hollywood world. It takes place on someone's desk, assuming some sort of animator, and you have to avoid these weird elves and stationery. Towards the end of the desk you fall into an ink pot, and that drops you along a film strip where you can pick where you land, and then you're dodging film related obstacles. We're back to having inanimate objects as enemies, which is giving me Space Mutant flashbacks, but this is the most imaginative level in the game. It has an otherworldly feel to it, but in a more intentional way. And you even get a cameo from Itchy. That's just a nice surprise to see him here. It's not amazing level design wise, but a cool bonus, and I appreciate them putting something in here like this. So that's Bart vs. the World. Like Space Mutants, I spent most of my time complaining about this game in the video, and for good reason. They attempted to make this game easier, and they also massively opened up the levels to feel more expansive, but they didn't make enough improvements and even stepped back in some areas. The controls are just awful, the level design is so directionless, and it's even more punishing than Space Mutants, with nasty difficulty spikes throughout. The copy and paste approach used throughout rips the game of some of its soul, and even though they're using cheap padding techniques, it's still extremely short. It feels a bit more like a Simpsons game, which is good, but it's putting Bart in the most generic themes and locations you can think of. And it adds to that generic feeling by also including bonus games, which are the most basic idea for minigames you could think of. This game took me weeks to beat, not because it's long, but because simply I didn't want to play it, and maybe that's all that needs to be said. This game was clearly massively rushed to get another Bart game out for Christmas 1991, but rushed and unfinished games back on the NES didn't crash and burn publicly in the same way they do nowadays. It's probably due to the low expectations of games and production values being much lower compared to today's market, along with the lack of internet and social media. When you look back at old games, it's not a shock that some of them were terrible and poorly made, but Bart vs. the World isn't just a bad game, it's the NES equivalent of Lord of the Rings Gollum, just without the public shaming that game got. Now the question is, where do I rank it? But I think the actual question is it better or worse than Bart vs. the Space Mutants? Out of the two, Bart vs. the World is the game that's easier to beat. You're more likely to get through this one, where Space Mutants is much longer, and that museum level is a nightmare. Outside of that, there's a lot less of worth in Bart vs. the World. What made Space Mutants unique with all the items and environment interact is gone, and Bart vs. the World doesn't replace that with anything worthwhile, instead filling itself out with half-baked content. I do think the level design is worse in Bart vs. the World as well, there's just a lot less of it which helps takes the edge off. To me though, I give the edge to Space Mutants, because there's things I can point at and say, yeah, that's alright. Bart vs. the World has the same lows as Space Mutants, but no real highs. Well, highs might be too strong of a word, but there's nothing to praise or find interesting. It's just a product they put on shelves so someone can buy something with Bart's face on it. I'm putting Bart vs. the World for the NES underneath the Amiga and MS-DOS ports of Space Mutants, but above the ZX Spectrum port. The fact that the first stage of Space Mutants on ZX Spectrum is so difficult to beat means I would take Bart vs. the World over it. For the Amiga and MS-DOS port of Space Mutants, it does have better graphics than that opening cutscene, so I think it has a little bit more value than Bart vs. the World for NES. Just like Space Mutants, Bart vs. the World got its own ports, but nowhere near as many. When Bart vs. the World came out, Space Mutants was still being ported to other platforms, so the teams had to finish porting Space Mutants first before they could come back to Bart vs. the World. We got 4 ports of Bart vs. the World all coming out in 1993, the same year that Star Fox and Sonic CD came out. It's worth noting this just to highlight how late these games were being released. We'll start with the Amiga port, and these graphics look oddly familiar. Instead of using the art style used for the Space Mutants Amiga port, we have the more colourful cartoony style used in the Space Mutants ports on the Sega systems. That's because all the ports of Bart vs. the World were handled by ARC Developments, the team that handled the Mega Drive, Master System and Game Gear versions of Bart vs. the Space Mutants. It's the same basic game, but it's been completely recreated in what I would assume is a different engine, so everything feels a little bit different. There's the graphics of course, but the controls have also changed. It's back to our one button control scheme, so jumping has been switched to pressing up on the joystick instead of being on a button. Not a great change, but you get used to it after a bit. The super high jump is still here, but this time they have improved the base jump, so it's less heavy, making it both quicker and a bit more floaty. Bart moves a bit quicker as well, so this plays better overall. Still a bit stiff and awkward, but it has a bit more of a loose feeling to it, and it makes moving around less of a chore. The other major changes outside of graphics and control is content. Most of the content is still present, but the Simpsons trivia bonus games have been completely removed, and we have full levels missing as well. The pyramid level has been cut, the Soundstage 3 bonus level has been cut, and the long platforming section at the end of Soundstage 2 has also been completely removed. It's a shame that the trivia and Soundstage 3 are gone, but I hated the pyramid level, and the platforming of Soundstage 2 was really tedious, so these cuts do help the game overall be a smoother ride. It's weird to be complimenting a game that was already under an hour for cutting content, but it does feel like a net positive. The music has been completely redone and I kind of love it. Imagineering have been terrible with soundtracks so far, and while the soundtrack here doesn't really fit the game too well, it does sound closer to something from an educational game, it can be catchy. How disconnected the music is from the levels themselves can almost be charming, and charming is the word I would use for this port. Graphically, I think the art style works much better for Bart vs. the World than it did for Space Mutants because this game isn't trying to recreate Springfield, it's cartoony versions of common themes and locations. The looser controls also make this game more accessible. Saying that, it's still got the same level design issues as the NES version, and the physics can be a bit weird. In the Frozen River level, when you jump on the ice blocks, the blocks go in the way that you're facing when you land, so if you're facing the wrong way, which is easy to do, you shoot off in the wrong direction. For every odd change that doesn't make sense, we also have good changes, like the bubbles in the ice cave now last much longer, so you can wait until they appear and then jump, and that feels so much better. There's lots of tweaks like this throughout the game, and I think overall it makes it better. It's still not a good game. If you play this version first, you'll still likely get frustrated at the level design, and the lack of creativity is obvious. The climbing also feels just as bad as it did on the NES, and the North Pole boss is oddly more difficult. It's going to be hard to list out all the changes, as it is trying to be true as possible to the original, but there are tweaks everywhere which overall are an improvement and make it more playable and allow it to be a little bit more of a quaint experience. I'm putting it above the NES version and even higher than Space Mutants on the Amiga and the MS-DOS. The lack of content, ambition, and the low points in the level design stop it from beating Space Mutants on the NES, but I find it a more charming and even experience compared to Space Mutants on the Amiga, so I believe it deserves to be one spot higher. Next up is the Atari ST Port, which is a downgraded version of the Amiga one, which you can see in terms of graphics and sound. For the sound though, the soundtrack of the game is oddly hypnotic. I really like the OST here, probably more than on the Amiga. Not because it's particularly good, but it's a type of music I've never heard before. It's plodding in a maddening way, but it almost makes it comes around to make it satisfying to listen to. That description probably doesn't make any sense, so go and listen to it for yourselves. Right, so this version is much weaker and worse than the Amiga one because of the controls and frame rate. It stutters constantly. Feels like every time the screen scrolls it lags a bit, and some sections are really hard to play because of it. It's also really hard to land your jumps. Every one is a heart attack, as it still has the loose feel from the Amiga port, but without any good sense of control. It makes sections like going upwards in the ice cave really hard to do. You really have to concentrate on every jump, and it's easy to miss one and have to climb all the way back up. It's hard to overlook the stuttering and poor jumping, so it's going underneath Space Mutants for the ZX Spectrum because that game controlled better, but it's going above Space Mutants on the Mega Drive because a game with a soundtrack this odd can't go too low. Right, time for the Sega ports. This time they skipped the Mega Drive and went only to the Master System and Game Gear. I can't say for sure why they skipped the Mega Drive, but this was 1993, and there was already an original game on the Mega Drive with Bart's Nightmare alongside Krusty's Funhouse, so it seems like they were keeping the Imagineering games to last gen consoles only. Anyway, for the Master System port we once again have the same art style, but with graphical tweaks so it can run on the Master System. There are changes here that you wouldn't really expect to be different, considering it's a port by the same developer as the other two. The main one is health. You now only have 4 hits, but to make up for that, health pickups now completely refill your health rather than only healing 1 hit like before. There's lots of little changes, like the people on the wall on the skateboarding level are now harder to avoid. None of these changes are game breaking, but it's just odd that someone would go in and make these little tweaks. I didn't get on with this game. It can be laggy, although nowhere near as bad as the Atari ST Port. The problem with the game is the jumping. All 4 versions so far that I've played have had different jump physics and mechanics. I don't understand why they all have a different feel. My muscle memory is all over the place trying to figure out all these different types of jumps. For the Master System port, it's almost too responsive. When going upwards, it has more of that loose feel of the Amiga port, but as soon as you stop pressing the D-pad to position yourself to land, you drop like a brick. When I first got to the ice cave, I was missing the first jumps because there's no momentum to your jump. Whenever you stop pressing a button, you drop straight down. In theory, this should give you more precision, but there's a lack of leniency here, and with how small the platforms are, it's too easy to undershoot your jumps. I tried to adjust to this style of jump, and I wanted to give the game the benefit of the doubt, but after a couple of game overs in the ice cave, I threw in the towel. The great music is gone, and the jumping is just too unforgiving. It's going underneath the Atari ST version of Bart vs. the World. Alright, only one more to go, and this time it's on the Game Gear. Not too much to say here, this is 1-to-1 with the Master System port. Same jumping and content, only this time with screen crunch. For Space Mutants, I ranked the Master System and Game Gear versions the same, as it didn't feel like the screen crunch really affected that game too much, but I can't say the same for Bart vs. the World. With the more open level design, you feel the lack of screen space a lot more. I kept dying in the skateboarding section as you get a lot less time to react to pits, and the Burns boss fight on top of the wall was also much harder as you have less space to avoid his attacks. It's not a massive downgrade, but I think it hurts the game enough that I'm going to rank it 1 below the Master System version. In the end, Bart vs. the World is a disappointing sequel, but one that reflects the fact that Imagineering released 3 brand new Simpsons games all in the same year. It's a shame though, as Escape from Camp Deadly proved that you could take Bart vs. the Space Mutants, simplify it, tweak some mechanics, and come out with something half decent despite being much smaller in scope. Bart vs. the World was trying to do something very similar, but approached it in a different way, by still trying to be new and different and making it more accessible, but ended up getting lost with padding the game out and reducing the quality of content across the board. It's hard to say if more time would have helped with this game, because I don't see many sparks of creativity that could have been turned into something cool if they had more time, although that might just prove how little time they had to come up with ideas. With that said, that's Bart vs. the World added to the list. Thank you very much for watching. If you agree or disagree with me, please let me know in the comments. Also consider giving the video a like. It really helps letting me know if people enjoy the video or not. I'll see you next time for Bart's House of Weirdness, which will finally give me a break from all this dodgy platforming. I hope.